Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. We're just going to wait a few minutes just as more people join the webinar, and then we'll get started. Okay, so I think we've got enough participants now, and it's amazing to see how many of you have joined, so thank you for your support. So welcome to the first episode of our brand new content series called Our Tandem Talks. And for purposes of GDPR, this webinar is being recorded today. So we're really excited to launch our new series. This webinar series will take place on the last Tuesday of every month for the coming months, and we will be inviting the industry's most respected leaders and thought leadership speakers to be sharing their knowledge and their insights with us as we navigate the path ahead. So today we are joined with Kevin Empey, founder of Work Matters, and our Tandem CEO, Aisling Tayard. We hope it's going to be an interactive session. We've got polls and a Q&A, so please feel free to post your comments and questions below, and hopefully we can get to them at the end. So the topic we'll be talking about today is the path to creating an agile workforce, and all things agility, resilience, and adaptability, and hopefully it's going to be a great session. So without further ado, I think it's time to pass over to Aisling to introduce the session.
Hi everybody, delighted to be back with our new series, and thank you to so many of you for joining us today. As always, we want to make this community-based, and so this is about HR having some time out to reflect and think about the future and think about the things that are most important for their organizations. So we love your input throughout this session, but also your input for future sessions, what you'd like us talking about. So please do feel free to use the chat at all times to give us ideas and your thoughts about areas you'd like us to cover. I'm particularly delighted that we're kicking off with Kevin today. And in fact, I think his name alone is the reason why so many of you have joined us today, because his reputation precedes him. And Kevin is one of those thought leaders who personally I find super insightful, and somebody who, it doesn't matter how many times I hear him speak, I always walk away having learned something new. But what I particularly like is the area he's going to cover for us today, and it's an area very close to our Tandem's heart, because we are all about shaping culture for an agile world. And nobody knows agility and the whole area of agile better than Kevin. And there's a lot of speakers who speak on this area, and they reduce it to things like the methodology around agile and so on. But actually Kevin goes a lot deeper, and his master's and all of the research that he's put into this area really facilitates him to be a very deep and insightful speaker on the area of agile. So I'm hoping his thoughts and his reflections on this area will be of great value to you today. This is a community. We want it to be participative, so do get involved, add your comments, add your chat, add your questions throughout, and join us in the conversation. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who's going to take us through his thoughts and reflections on this whole area. And over to you, Kevin.
Great. Thank you so much, Aisling. Gosh, what a generous introduction, and I hope I can live up to even half of that now for the next hour or so. But delighted to be joining Tandem again and it's just a great community discussion forum that you've created over the last number of months, and more to come now, as you say, on the last Tuesday of every month. So thank you very much for having me. And yeah, we were discussing, weren't we, about like this, where are we at the moment, whether it's COVID or even discussing, what was already going on before COVID and what that means in practical reality. And I think, yes, that's one of the things you mentioned, that we really want to get sort of the sleeves up, as it were, and into some of the practical aspects of this whole agility question and where we move on from here. So look, you've done plenty of the introductions, won't waste time on that. And I guess my background, though, is came from a technology background originally and business, and then but for the last 25 years or so moved into the more people space and leadership side. I guess with that instinct that a lot of the change around the technology and the organization business side, some of which was people led, right, and really fascinated by that. And for the last 10 years or so, really focusing on what this mirage called the future of work doesn't even exist. It's just this, the label that we use for all things speeding up, if you like, in the world of work, and been focusing on that for the last 10 years. And that's really put me straight bang into the whole area of agility for reasons that we'll come on to. And I also, part of my role is running the senior executive program up in the IMI. So I guess it's a few lenses, from a technology lens, a business lens, a HR leadership lens that I tend to look at this topic in a very pragmatic way, I hope. But look, I guess the context, no need to waste time on that, I don't think. We all know it, don't we? Like whether we're talking about VUCA or the future of work, or indeed how we're coping with COVID, or digital transformation, or any of the above. These things were happening before COVID. But COVID has just really accelerated, and we've heard that word so many times, haven't we? That it's just really exaggerated and accentuated this fact, this organizational fact that we're living in more complex times, both individually and collectively as organizations. So the pace of change, everybody talks about that fact that the pace of change is moving so quickly. And also uncertainty and different ways of getting things done, and also surprises in the market and disruptors in our business and our sectors, all increasing at a higher rate than maybe before, maybe more than we grew up with, if you like, for those of us who've been around a while. And so therefore this kind of maybe plan and control mindset or approach that maybe we were able to achieve before, traditional organizational management kind of processes and structures, are just coming under huge strain, aren't they, in terms of dealing with greater complexity that has been caused by all the conditions we face now, both since COVID and before. So I guess that's just the context, is how do we deal with complexity? And when you look at that, and when you sort of peel back the layers of the onion and understand what's really at the heart of that in terms of individual capability and organizational capability, you just can't get away from this question of agility, both in the research and indeed our practice. I like this quote, I think, because agility, along with resilience at organizational, team and individual level, is the key adaptive quality required to deal with turbulent change. And I think the data is interesting in that, because this research was done post the last crisis, the financial crisis, when we'd hoped that would be it for a while in terms of big global disruptive events. But what these folks did was look at, well, who actually came out of that stronger? Who seemed to come out quicker and stronger and better, actually, from a very, very tough time? And they boiled it down to these sort of two sides of this coin in terms of agility and resilience. And so therefore I just thought, well, let's look at that a bit deeper. Let's understand a bit more about this. It's something perhaps that the tech world has probably been dealing with since the late 90s with things like the internet, and the pace of change and consumer expectations really disrupted their whole way of working and how they were going to approach what they did and how they did it. But at the same time, this agility question, although it's often and universally, probably ad nauseum, and probably to a state that we're bored almost with the word, it's commonly used, but it's quite poorly understood, and it's very unevenly executed. And that's what I think the discussion for today is, how do we execute this in a more real way and bring it more alive? So we thought, look, to get the conversation going, as Aisling said, I think Megan's going to launch a poll for us just to sort of see where you are on some of these issues of resilience and agility. So the first one popping up then, are you feeling resilient today yourselves? Yes, fine, full of energy, ready. No, feeling a bit worn down. Not sure, need to think about this one. But it's just a question about your own personal resilience over the last number of months. Where are you right now? It's anonymous, by the way, so don't worry about that. Just feel free. And we just spend a few more seconds and we'll close that. Thanks, Megan. Oh, wow. Okay, so that's pretty encouraging, right? So maybe we should do this again on Thursday, Friday, see how it's going. but it's interesting, isn't it? 25% there. No, actually, feeling pretty worn down. And some people probably so busy, and you're just so going with it that you haven't really sat back and thought about that. But I think it's really, really important point about how is everybody, and this question of resilience. Okay, thanks very much, Megan. We'll close that and move on. I think this question of resilience and agility, it's probably worthwhile just thinking about that. And just going to move on the screen here. Yeah, cool. Just a bit of distinction, because I think sometimes resilience and agility are often used in the same sort of breath, and I just think it's worthwhile maybe unpicking that a bit. And of course there's overlap, but I'm just interested in what you think. But when we're talking about the organizational human level, this is the way I've found helps me sort of distinguish between the two. And this idea of resilience being a capacity to absorb, and to recover, to rebound, to dig in, basically, and persist in difficult circumstances. It's like that sort of the survive, if you like, capacity. Like the roots of this tree, you just feel like they're holding on and they're able to kind of withstand those kind of natural pressures. Whereas the agility point for me is this more forward-looking piece, and it's about the ability to sense and adapt, to respond, a more progressive, if you like, growth orientated. So if resilience is about survive, I guess agility is about the thrive bit, right? And I guess that's the kind of the focus we're going to look at today, and unpick this a little bit and see if we can understand this thorny concept a bit more. One of the metaphors I tend to use for this is the skiing analogy, where it's like where the skier is both short-term and long-term. So when you think about the skiing capability, either at organizational level or individual level here, we've got to be able to focus on what's in front of us, what's there now. We have to be able to deliver this week and this month and this quarter. We have to avoid this obstacle on the slope. We absolutely have to be present. But every now and again, we have to be able to look up and sense and respond, because sometimes people talk about agility as if it's like being responsive and adaptive all the time, almost chaotic in its sense. But actually, it's a much more controlled and disciplined idea. The ability to be able to focus and execute in the now, but also to be able to occasionally look up and sense what's coming around, because if the skier doesn't do that, they're going to end up over a cliff, right? Or not end up where they want to go longer term. So I think this is helpful for us to understand a little bit of the, if you like, the dichotomy or the paradox almost within agility, that it's both short-term, long-term. It's both dealing with the now, but also being able to sense and respond at the same time. It's not like people talk about agility. Well, can I be agile on Tuesdays and, if you like, stable and settled on Wednesdays? And how does it work? But it's actually this kind of ability to be almost ambidextrous around that skill. It's also not, we don't just throw ourselves down mountains, right? We have to learn some skills perhaps and have the right equipment and discipline with a strong core. So they're just some of the ideas in agility. And I think if you think about that analogy for both organizational level and individual level, it kind of gets at some of the kind of sense of what we're talking about here. That ability to be both stable and flexible, kind of at the same time. We look at this at organizational level then, and one of the things, certainly we've discovered a lot, and I know this will just resonate, I'm sure, with your own experience. But agility turns up, if you like, and shows up at different parts of the organization. And, we've all worked maybe in teams that might be really, really agile, really, and I don't mean agile as in terms of all the methods and the tools, just very flexible, adaptive. They move quickly, they respond, customer orientated, etc. But they might work in an organization, though, that isn't agile, right? Where the overall strategy and the culture is still quite traditional. And, it's like working against a headwind almost in terms of trying to get stuff done. Think about our HR practices and processes. Do they enable agility or do they actually block it a little bit? So there's the organizational layer, there's the team functional layer, and then there's something which we're going to talk about a bit more today, which is the individual. Where am I with this? Am I agile? Do I have an agile mindset? Is this a natural way of working for me? I've talked to people even in the software development area which would claim to be quite agile and quite flexible and adaptive, but some of them said, we're struggling with this too, because it's maybe a way of working or a way of thinking that isn't always natural. And then we've got the leadership role, haven't we? The sort of leadership glue that tries to bring it all together. Leadership agility, how agile are our leaders? Or are they working to the same sort of patterns of behavior of the past? And does that serve them well for this greater complexity that we're talking about? So we know agility needs to be, if you like, understood, I guess, in practical terms of what does it look like across the organization and at these different levels. And we've got a tool called SCOPE. It's a sort of an anagram for COP, strategic, culture, organization, people, and external. It's like a health check of sorts, just to very, very high level questions as to, well, where are those blockers and enablers in our case? And in this case, for instance, dark blue, this organization rated itself medium to high and said, well, actually at the strategic level and external level, we're pretty much on tune. We know why agility is important and we're pretty committed to it. But at the operational level, we're having difficulty. We're still working maybe to traditional ways of working and processes that are maybe holding us back. So the intent, if you like, versus the reality is a problem for us. So we'll talk a little bit about this approach later on. It was interesting. This is not to be confused. I know there's pictures on the side. This is just literally a screen grab of an online launch of the Global Business Agility Report from the Business Agility Institute. Their annual, they've done about 3 or 4 of these reports just to say, what is the state of agility globally in organizational terms? And it's interesting the type of challenges they come up, the top challenges to an organization's attempt to become more agile. Leadership style and agile mindset sort of coming out quite clearly. So in other words, it wasn't necessarily about, we don't have the training or the processes and practices. It was a very human challenge around agility was showing up, if you like, along with some of the classics like we're still very siloed, funding, we've got maybe traditional funding schemes, etc., capacity issues, training issues, resources. But it's just interesting, leadership style and agile mindset. And I was talking to, Peter Dunn is his name, a product director for SimCorp in Denmark, a financial services company, and he was one of the leaders in their agile transformation as part of their digital transformation. And he said there's two things. One, that constituted the success of their experience. And one was the leader who was particularly in charge, the role model, the leader who just said, look, this is a journey we're going to go on. I don't know the answer to it. I'm not an expert in it. All I know is this is the right way to go. And I'm going to need your help as an organization to work with us on that. Don't have all the answers. We're going to have to figure this out together. But what Peter said he was doing was he was basically in that sort of servant leadership style. He was basically showing great role modeling and authenticity and saying, this is the path we're going to go on, and I'm going to make it safe for us to experiment and to try things and maybe fail and hit a hurdle from now and again. But ultimately, it's a journey that we're on, and I need your help with it. He thought that was number one, really. That set the tone for the whole mood that people took and the approach they took. And the second point that he said was a differentiator was the individuals, not teams and processes and practices, but actually individuals getting the kind of on board with the idea of them trying this out for themselves and this being good for their future, their careers, and feeling safe because of the leader to be able to take it on. But it was just interesting, quite separately to this report, those were the two factors he said were part of the success of their attempts to become more of an agile organization. So I think we're going to just go into another poll there, Megan, just to kind of test you on where you are on the whole agility question. Do you think your organization is more agile since the pandemic? Interesting question, whether the COVID has helped to maybe accelerate this quest for greater agility and adaptiveness. We'll just spend a couple of minutes there, or a couple of seconds, should I say, and we'll come back in. What do you think? Interesting, isn't it? 80% And no, interesting. Love to hear more about that. Like, is that because you're already pretty agile as it was, or actually are you saying that maybe the organization hasn't really responded? It's still sort of holding on to maybe traditional methods and ways of doing things. Interesting about that. But 80%, and so we've all had this huge experiment, haven't we? This bath in the agility point of view and experience, whether we kind of wanted it or not. And I guess let's look at those. Just maybe leadership agility. Let's look at functional agility and then individual agility. Let's spend a few minutes on those. That leadership, I think I've mentioned it already, and I even gave that example, and an interesting quote from Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. But clearly, it's something that we're going to have to engage our leaders on. This question as to where are we in our adaptiveness, our resilience as an organization, our agility as an organization, whatever words we want to use. But it's an interesting question as to whether the leadership model and styles that have got us to success, for the last 10, 20 years, whether they're enough to help us adapt into the future. And certainly I'm sure you've all heard the different seminars and discussions about whether the pandemic has led to maybe a change in leadership tone, the more empathetic perhaps leader, the servant leader type of idea. Certainly those are very relevant leadership styles to the whole area of agility, the servant leadership approach, but also that ability to be able to flex leadership styles if and when needed, because sometimes people need absolute clarity, like the skier. They need guidance to get over the next slope, not just that sort of vision for greater agility and adaptiveness in the future. So look, we could do a full session on the leadership agenda. There's also the team agenda. Do you remember in that circle we talked about? And this is, and I know some folks probably on the call who've been through this journey from a HR, just take HR point of view, but you could take procurement and finance and sales equally on this. And it's just an interesting question as to where we're coming from. Are we still more in the traditional sense, or are we moving to a more agile approach and mindset regarding our agility and the way we do things? So, for instance, HR, we could argue that over the years that an awful lot of HR's the ask of HR was to come up with consistency, effectiveness, efficiency, policies, rules, standards. There's employment law that has to be navigated. We have to be careful about transparency and fairness. But has that led to, for instance, that a lot of the systems and processes are quite maybe rigid? And are they actually enabling agility, or are they maybe getting in the way? Performance management being a classic. Is it really, is it something we prescribe, or is it something that we could actually adapt maybe for different parts of the organization? It's just a very interesting question. And it's this idea, for instance, about delivering programs to customers, as HR, because we're the experts, if you like, rather than maybe a co-creation with customers, start to take some of the pressure off our shoulders and get our customers, our line management involved in the design. So it's an interesting spectrum that we in our programs talk about where are we in our own agility, both as a function and as leaders. But as I say, procurement, finance, sales, all going through that sort of question to say, actually, particularly those control functions, that are we holding the organization back in terms of agility, or are we moving it forward and enabling it to be more agile and adaptive? There's a question too about what suits what. So does everybody and every department and every function have to be agile? Maybe not, and probably not. We still need these qualities on the left-hand side. We need control. We need systems. It's just that we're open to greater agility and more agility when appropriate. That's really the question. Like, again, the skiing analogy, that we're able to focus and have control, but also then look up and see what might be a different course of action for a different issue and a different problem or a different area of the business. And the question of whether HR is agile in itself, as well as whether it enables agility in the wider organization. We can maybe come back to that later on. But whether you're talking about leaders or functions, the thing that always comes up in all of the engagements that I'm involved in, and is this question about mindset. Everybody seems to agree that, agility requires attention to both skill set and mindset. So of course we need the tools and practices and processes. But there's also the issue of the mindset and approach at individual level particularly. And it's just one of those things that we need to attend to, and that's often ignored. And that's what really, for the sort of last section here of the talk is to kind of maybe think about individual agility and what that means. And we're asking an awful lot of people already these days. And the question is, what will that now look like what does agility look like at that individual level? It's not an easy time, right, to be dealing with this. But again, like the poll said, 80% there in terms of organizationally, individuals have had a masterclass in having to act in a very agile way, haven't they? In a very flexible way. It's been a real bath in this area. But yet, this was happening anyway, wasn't it? In terms of with these qualities and with this experience, how do we capture the legacy of that experience from a positive perspective and enable people to carry some of those qualities forward into the disruption and the change that's to come, right? But we also have to understand that actually it's a really, really difficult time for employees, and it has been for a number of years, by the way. We've seen an increase in stress and burnout, concern about the world of work, a bit like the boat on this and the ocean here, trying to hang on in there and adapt to what was already a changing circumstance, the precarious nature of work, 0 hours contracts in some cases, disruption, digitalization, automation, robotics, etc. It's already been quite a stressful time at work, and now we put COVID on this, and it's even more so. As Andrew McAfee, who wrote the book Second Machine Age, said, it's never been a better time to be an employee, particularly a knowledge-based employee with lots of flexibility and technology options, but it's also never been a more concerning time to be an employee as well. And so what this personal agility agenda is about is trying to help people not control the ocean. Do you remember that graph we talked about, sort of plan and control? We know plan and control of our working lives and of our careers is going to be hard because we get hit with whether it's Brexit or whether it's COVID or financial crisis or our own company's individual stuff or robotics, etc. We're not going to be able to control the circumstances. But what we're about is trying to help people navigate them, to be able to ride the wave, if you like, with skill, to have the tool set, the skill set, the mindset to be able to navigate the wave, if not control it. And that's the kind of spirit, I suppose, that we want to kind of talk about now, which is this question of not just the skill set, but the mindset. And I think it's worthwhile, there's a lot going on here, but just the idea about our attention to both mindset and skill set. I guess above the line here, we're talking about the seen part is observable habits, actions, skills. It's the type of things we see in ourselves and in people, right? But mindset is also about, I suppose, that inclination or that attitude or that orientation, that sort of mental inclination to something, right? And it's built based on our conscious knowledge, the stuff we know are the information, the education, the thought, and even our intent on doing things. That's well known. We know that. But it's also, isn't it, part of the subconscious is a big part of our mindset, right? That's the underlying bit. That's the dangerous bit. That's the one where our assumptions and perceptions and feelings and values, emotions, habits are stored up over so long. It's like the rational and emotional, isn't it? The conscious, subconscious, the skill and the will. That's all we're saying here. So stuff that you're totally aware of already. It's just that sometimes we don't sort of take time to take note of what's going on between those two areas, the conscious and subconscious, when it comes to mindset. And I think it's quite relevant here in terms of the agility challenge. So we've got to attend to this mindset. This conscious, subconscious, I suppose it reminds me, I'm teaching my my teenage son how to drive at the moment, and oh my God, it's pretty horrific when you start actually thinking about how you drive for the first time in a very, very long time, and you sort of surface your consciousness about what your habits are, and you realize, oh my gosh, if I took the driving test, I'd fail it tomorrow, and here am I supposed to be teaching somebody. And you realize, I suppose, you reflect that so much of how you drive a car, for instance, is subconscious. It's not conscious at all. And you've just been doing it for so long. It's just built up habit. And so it is with how we approach work. So much of our daily habits and skills and behaviors are subconscious. And I think that's what I'm just trying to raise here, is the idea that we should attend to that and think about that. And I think we know it makes sense, but sometimes in my experience on this agility challenge is that, people are looking for maybe that quick fix, looking for tools and practices and products and, methods that will enable them to be, not very agile on Friday, but really agile on Monday, that like it's a switch or something that we can turn on. When actually, the attention to the mindset is something that, we'll get to that, and we'll attend to that, but actually maybe it doesn't get the attention it deserves. So look, let's have a look at that before we finish up. And I guess, look, you could put your own kind of words to this, but for me, it's that you're probably very aware of that whole Carol Dweck and, that growth mindset, fixed mindset. I think that's a really good start to what the agile mindset is about. It's about not being limited by past experience and our current knowledge, but being open to being challenged, being open to new learning. Like that leader, for instance, who said, I am open to however this goes and I need your help to teach me because I don't know the full picture. That idea. And maybe a bit like the surfing point as well, that idea that, well, look, we're not going to be able to manage change in that kind of way and minimize disruption. It's going to happen anyway. So how do we have a mindset that is more open and embracing and comfortable with change and ambiguity? Maybe a switch from, a reliance on strategy and clarity and goals and sort of linear plans to something that is a bit more adaptive, but really driven by a higher purpose, etc. And a bias for action rather than needing to, paralysis by analysis sort of situation, because maybe we're just never going to know all of the facts that we need to move. And an emphasis on collective. So these are just some indicators of the agile mindset, if you like, at play. And it's just worthwhile thinking about, well, where am I on those? And a bit like earlier on, maybe we're saying that the traditional mindset is not bad. We need the focus and the attention and the rigor and the discipline that some of these factors on the left give us. It's just that we are being open now and accepting that we're going to have to rely on a more open mindset for all this change that we're facing now and we're going to face more of in the future. So that idea about embracing the agile mindset for me is a very important part of the puzzle here in terms of organizational agility, because at some stage we have to address the individual's journey on this. What is an organization? Only a collection of individuals. Just a very quick run around on this, just to give you a sense. The typical process perhaps when we look at something like a change, such as let's be more agile, great idea, how do we go about it? Typically we focus on the logic of that and on the conscious and the information and education, and maybe we get some training and we get some skills on it and we expect the outcomes to come. And typically, and I do look back at some of my own change experience and I kind of go, yeah, do you know what? We did focus on that sort of more surface level of change a little bit too much, perhaps. We took it for granted that people would pick up on these ideas and skills and habits, when actually the reality was that the people's behavior was more coming from their subconscious, right? It was coming from a deeper sense of their assumptions and their perceptions. And they were not necessarily always in line with the change that you want to make. In this case, agility. Actually, I'm much more comfortable with my traditional mindset. And therefore, I'm probably going to default to my subconscious preferences, and my underlying habits. And that's going to be a much stronger driver of my behavior than the more logical, conscious ideas that I've been convinced about. It's the hearts and minds here, isn't it? That's really what we're talking about. But my question or my challenge to you maybe is on this issue and others, have we attended to people's needs regarding their mindset and particularly their assumptions and their perceptions about helping them understand the benefit of what they are trying to do, or what we're trying to do in the change program? Or are we relying on this more sort of surface level conscious side? So for some, that agile mindset shift that we talked about just earlier is going to be very easy. It's going to be natural. This is a natural. Their underlying assumptions and perceptions and values are going to be geared that way. But for others, it's going to be tricky and difficult. And I think as change leaders, as HR, and as leaders generally, we just need to be conscious that for some people, it's going to be a tougher journey. But ultimately, we've got to kind of embrace that. So I suppose the ideal is that we're kind of conscious of the change that we're trying to make here with people. We're trying to help them, as it says in the bottom there, believe in the change being sought, not just for the organization, but for themselves, to be able to help build up their resilience and their own personal agility and adaptiveness, so that they can not just get through, these COVID times, for instance, but also thrive in the future and take on. And it's when you have this kind of perfect alignment, if you like, or close to perfect alignment between the surface level skills and behaviors and the conscious, the logic side of, we know this is good and right for us. But we've also reconciled that with our subconscious as well, in terms of, this is something I want. This is something I believe in. If we can get people to kind of get to that point, then the potential is huge for people to get outstanding results. And in fact, this cycle will self-fulfill. It'll self-propagate, because people will get more confidence and they'll get more realization that this is the way to operate for themselves as well as anything, and to stop fighting, if you like, the change that is inevitable. So I think sometimes this is going to just worthwhile paying some attention to. And it's also where resilience comes back in, because I think this idea about, we all know what it's like to take up a new habit, right? Or to lose a bad habit. There's that initial, kind of trepidation, that initial failure. Like, for instance, driving the car, for instance. I mean, if we didn't want to drive that car, we'd give up, wouldn't we, after the first lesson, because it feels so clunky. But the point is, we want to drive. We want to learn how. And that gives us the resilience, that belief, if you like, gives us the resilience to push through those early barriers. And to adapt and to take on these skills. And we have to be quite vulnerable to do that. And that's why things like psychological safety and trust and a good culture from leaders is so important here, so that people can get to deal with this. So I know I'm laboring that point, but I just think it's certainly one of the big lessons I've picked up on this agility challenge is we've got to address mindset, and we've got to open up what does that actually mean, rather than just glossing over it. Finally, the point about the surface level. These are how do we know an agile mindset is actually at play and is actually happening with people? And so what we did was we looked at the skills and the behaviors, the competencies, if you like, that you can see above the surface, the skill set, if you like, side of this. And there's a model, and we can put in the white paper again with more detail on this. But there's like 17 components behind these key themes. So, for instance, behind purposefulness is things like being self-led and outcome orientated. For instance, in change orientation, it's about your orientation towards change, your resilience, your adaptiveness. And what we're able to do is put up a tool to be able to sort of give people, most importantly, self-reflect on how agile they are in terms of the skill set and indeed the underlying mindset. And that's where it's great, with something like Tandem, because as well as being able to put the, all the things on Tandem that is there, like regarding feedback and recognition and goal setting and coaching and providing that whole employee experience in terms of one platform. Tandem have also put up this personal agility assessment tool as well, so you can get your own feedback on yourself and also get others' feedback on things like your adaptiveness, your agility, etc. And and very easy to see, maybe look where are one or two of my gaps, etc. There's also on Tandem the ability to be able to do that organizational agility tool as well, not just the individual, and to be able to see, oh, where are we in our agility as an organization? Where is our gaps that we might work on? So I just wanted to show you that, because I think what we're saying here finally is that this agility challenge, sometimes there's been a case, yes, we want to be more agile, and maybe COVID has helped us be agile, but has it really, I guess? And I sense the need maybe sometimes for us to just reflect on that and think about how are we bringing forward some of those practices and those skills that we've learned. And hopefully maybe some of the tools that we've shared here and the ideas will help sort of fill in some of the blanks in terms of tools and ideas and abilities to be able to maybe move on your agility from where it is today. So that's it really, and just a final message. I think that while we've always had resilience and we've always had agility, it's been a part of our human condition and our survival. It's just that I think going forward, and COVID has probably presented this, but going forward it's going to have to be something that we're more deliberate about and more mindful and more sort of widely applied, rather than some episodic or heroic thing that we do every 10 years. But we need to be very practical and pragmatic about what it actually looks like. And for me, a fascinating area is HR's role in shaping organizational agility, and by definition and by extension, the future of work readiness, really, and helping the workforce to be more agile, not just for the organization, but for themselves and future-proofing their careers, etc. So maybe to finish, and then to get into conversation, we could have a last poll, Megan, just to see what people's view about that in terms of HR's role. There's a question there. Is HR taking a leading role in shaping agility in your organization? Yes? No? Do we take a lead role? Do we not? Do we do it indirectly? Or is it something we haven't really considered and thought about? Just another few seconds and we'll get those results. Quite mixed, isn't it? So great to see that 34%, yes, HR's role in driving agility for reasons we'll discuss. No, indirectly, haven't really considered. Quite interesting. Well, I really hope that some of those ideas that we've been sharing will help. But maybe, Aisling, we could just go back into chat and give people a break from my voice for a start.
All right, that was great, Kevin. Thank you. And so much food for thought in that. And I think, to finish up on that poll is really interesting because, it's such I've met so many heads of HR and CHROs where the organization wants to move to agile, and they've gone deep into agile, so their sprint methodologies and a project management matrix structure in their organizations and so on. And sometimes the HR processes have been left behind, I guess, in many of these regards. So the organization is making structural changes. And when HR aren't at the table, often those structural changes can unravel their processes, such as, simple things like goals. We now have project management matrix structures where goals need to be cascaded not just from a linear people manager, but from project managers. And those same project managers need to give feedback on how people have done in their project team, and how do we collate and aggregate that feedback and get it back to the people manager, or indeed, does the project manager just share the feedback directly with the employee? How can the project manager check in and have one-to-ones? So like all these things that, naturally sat in a linear people management world suddenly get unraveled in the world of sprints and projects and, cross-functional management. And I think, I've seen organizations suffer a little bit where the organization has made some poor decision-making around those processes. And then suddenly HR have to kind of go in, rescue the situation, but they're on the back foot because they're reactionarily going in to solve a problem that's occurred, because suddenly you've got people who go from project to project to project and they have no boss, and there's no one to talk to them about their development, their career, their growth, and they're getting disengaged and they feel like nobody cares. And, suddenly HR are called in on the scene because the attrition rates have just spiked. So I think there's all sorts of implications of organizations going agile, and I'm a big believer HR needs to be sitting at that table with a loud voice at every take of those decision making, because otherwise the organization unravels our processes and we're not ready to respond in a way that's meaningful and well considered, and we're throwing answers at it and tech at it, and it's not always the right way to bring in these new enhancements and processes. And I think some of the questions maybe reflect some of this thinking. So there's two questions in for you, Kevin. The first one is, I think the concern is that we were temporarily agile and we were wondering what we will do to embed and sustain it. And I think that's a great question, because I've heard it so many times from so many people. A lot of people saw, great levels of flexibility and agility in the organization during COVID. And they're wondering, okay, if we all get back into the office, do we revert to type, or how can we sustain and embed it? Any thoughts around that?
No, you're dead right. And it's not just around agility. I think a lot of people are reflecting on, okay, how did we work before COVID on certain areas, whether it's culture or leadership styles or work processes or team processes or whatever? How have we been working within this COVID kind of world? And now as we go forward in a more, which of those things need to go back to the way they were? For instance, there could be some things that simply just have to go back. We're going to have some physical return to the office at some stage, for instance, for some activity. But what are some of those practices we want to retain in our DNA and in our culture and in our way of working and in our mindsets as well going forward? And then the question, and this is where HR for me has got this massive, powerful and influential role, is in the time we have from now, how do we sustain those practices and ensure that those practices don't fritter away like a thought in the wind, and maybe we allow ourselves to return back to some ways of thinking. Remember I mentioned that whole thing when I get out of the car with my son and I go back driving down the road, do you think I practice all the good habits that I've been trying to do with him? No, I revert back to the type, right? I revert back to the way I was. So how do we as HR intervene there with some of those process interventions you were talking about to say, well, actually we had to do performance management in a completely different way, goal setting in a different way, promotions, learning and development. So let's hold on to some of those things and make them now normal for the future. But not just in terms of processes, actually the way in which we went about things. So the idea of getting people to input their own views about how things should be. There's been maybe a lot more of that going on now. And so how do we continue that almost democratic way of doing things, that maybe we have done in COVID? So there's a huge amount, because I suppose HR, Aisling, to your earlier point too, we control or influence so many of the organizational levers and the employee experience processes. So it's a massive opportunity for HR to really repurpose all of those towards a more agile culture in the future.
Yeah, I think it's such an exciting time to go and reinvent, because an awful lot of the processes that we built in HR came from a period of time where we had traditional hierarchies. We had the classic military organizational hierarchy where the top cascaded to the bottom, and, it was all very linear and very easy. But now it's quite messy, it's cross-functional, it's matrix, it's sprint, complex. It's project, and it's just, hugely complex. So I think we have to retain our processes, but readapt them to the messiness and the complexity that we face now. And having new processes to replace that, and new technologies to replace the way we think, and because we can't think in those linear way. Goals don't just go from top to bottom anymore. They're going bottom up, they're going side to side, they're
changing.
They're changing, and people need to align to different sets of goals that aren't necessarily just their department's goals, but multiple departmental goals, and project managers need to be able to cascade goals, not just linear people managers. And, so I think an awful lot of the processes, we just have to turn them on their heads and go, how does the business need it to be now, versus what we had before?
And I guess we have an opportunity. There's a break point there. And we talk to people too about as they're preparing their sort of future of work plans now going back, there's an expectation amongst employees that there will be a change, because it's not like we're going to be, every employee knows it's not going to be the same as it was before, nor hopefully is it going to be as exactly as it is now. So everybody knows there's a new way of doing things coming, right?
Yeah.
So we've got this opportunity, and in fact the business are looking to us and saying to HR, tell us what that's going to be, just like they've been looking at us for the last 6 months and for leadership. I think they're going to be looking to us now to say, well, what is performance management 2.0, or how are we going to hire, maybe the nature in how we hire leaders and how we promote leaders and your recruitment processes need to change. The way we approach roles and getting work done needs to change. Maybe it's not all about the full-time equivalent employee anymore, that we're actually going to need more workforce adaptability as well in terms of jobs and roles, not just processes.
I'm conscious of getting people's comments and questions in here, Kevin, before we quickly run out of time, and there's lots pouring in. So Jane, thanks for joining in. She agrees that HR is critical to influencing the business to be more agile and respond proactively for the future. She's in a traditional business with few trailblazers. What's your top tip in getting people on board with the need to change? And what HR process or policy would you look at first? It's a great question.
It is, isn't it? And I think, and there's many people I think in the call who would give great advice on that. And for me, it's been about where there is that issue of trying to maybe get a bit of momentum, and you feel like the lone voice, and is that locus of control, right? Is that idea about trying to get control over what you do? That's one thing about, well, how do we bring agility into our own department, our own team? That's one thing, and to practice with those, and to learn, and to get our, to understand how that works. So that's one very practical thing that we have 100% control over. Our next step is to bring some of these ideas and agility into our own sphere, if you like. But in terms of then moving leaders and others along, is looking for possible wins. So, and people who would be of similar mind, people who already have that agile mindset, for instance, who have some pain points in their teams or in their business areas, and partner with them and say, how can I help you with those pain points? So that we're not trying to convince them or lecture them or try to say, oh, this is the way, and you've got to wake up and all that kind of talk. It's just not going to work. We know, because of the mindset challenge we have, we're going to have to be able to convince them based on where they're coming from, and based on the pain points that would be in their world. And if we can demonstrate how we can do that and add value in a pain point or two, then we can build on that. And then other departments and other managers will say, gosh, how did you do that? How did you reduce your lead time by 30% over there? What was it that happened there? How come HR are doing all that for those guys and they're not doing it for we want some of that? So to create a bit of demand that way from early successes.
Yeah, I was doing some research there on cultures of the future and the future of work and so on, for a white paper that we're releasing soon on the future of performance management. And there was an interesting theme coming across, because they were like, if your business isn't already looking at you, then you need to be banging down their door effectively to show them the way and lead the way in these practices. And it was interesting that an awful lot of them pointed to performance management as the most visible anchor of culture, because it feeds so many things and it feeds so many perceptions of who you are as an organization, that actually going after the big one, and it is kind of a controversial one sometimes, the scary one sometimes, that going after that one is the place to start, because it's an anchor for everything else that happens. Because if you change the way you manage performance, you change a lot about your organization. So I thought that was an interesting place to start, and a lot of the research was pointing there. But continuing with the questions, because we got to get them in. Somebody asked, how does this fit with EQI? I think they might have been referencing scope when you were showing, and what makes it different.
And is that EQ is in terms of emotional intelligence, do we think? I think that's the emotional intelligence side, perhaps. So maybe the personal agility piece and the mindset, and I forgot to say that, and it's a really good point. If that's what was meant by it, is that whole graph and the circle I did with the conscious and subconscious and getting alignment there and into the activity and behaviors and skills. There's so much resonating in that in terms of coaching, good coaching habits, emotional intelligence, neuroplasticity, and cybernetics, all of these great disciplines that are already there are all part of that idea about just trying to connect up what we do, what we know, and what we sort of feel, right? To connect up, to just raise awareness of that dynamic. And all I was just trying to do was to say, okay, this is how that stuff shows up in the agile mindset, because sometimes the agile traditional mindset requires this sort of change of habit or change of attitude and orientation. And yes, things like EQ will give us great insight maybe into some of those underlying habits and behaviors we have. But the personal agility tool, if that's what was being got at there in terms of difference, that's specifically looking at the whole model around that was based on what are the visible skills of people who are thriving in a fast-moving, adaptive environment. That was the specific skill set being observed or being analyzed and researched in that specific. It wasn't a personality trait or that type of or values-based questionnaire. It was actually looking at what's the skill set for an agile employee, or what is the skill set that might be those transversal skills for future of work readiness, if you like. Okay. That's what was behind it. There's two things actually there, both the business agility report and that white paper. We can send that on to people maybe, Ashley. Yeah.
Super, yeah, we'll do. Now the questions are pouring in here and we're not going to have time to answer all of them, but what we'll do is get back to people individually maybe.
Absolutely, totally.
Following on from this webinar. Sure. And cover them here in the next 4 minutes, but let me get one more in at least. This one's from Kathy O'Grady. So do some of the agile practices such as co-creating solutions work? Any examples?
Yeah, and that was, hi Kathy, and that co-creation one is a really key one. If you remember, we talked about that traditional HR to more agile HR, and one of those areas was maybe HR switching its kind of approach to always feeling the pressure to have to deliver a design and deliver a solution and deliver a process and policy to the organization, and actually say, you know what, this isn't all my issue here. Hang on, you're the leader, you're people, we've got to kind of, if this is going to be a sustainable change in your area, we're going to have to do this together. So that idea about co-creation and, if you like, giving up a bit of power though, isn't it, Aisling? It does require that. Co-creation does require me acknowledging that I don't have all the answers. So there is a bit of a step there.
Yeah. We had a great example of this. We worked with one of our clients on co-creation, and they're a very agile organization and they're very taken with design thinking and so on. And we went through this co-creation period with their business about what kind of feedback structures they would like, how they wanted their people to be managed and all that kind of stuff. And in many ways, HR were there and they had all the answers. Like, it was very clear. It was kind of like, the technology already does all these things. But actually what was powerful about the process itself was the buy-in that they garnered throughout it, because the business felt like it was theirs. And so there was a lot more ownership and commitment to the end state. In reality, HR probably could have designed it in a quarter of the time, so it wasn't necessarily the fastest process, but what they did do was they got huge buy-in, so that actually the implementation and the embedding of their solution was much faster than it would have been otherwise, when you're convincing everyone that this is the right.
And it set the tone, Ashley. It set the tone for how we're going to do the business with you in the future as well on the next.
Hugely effective. Yeah, it was really, and it was a great way to just hear the business and how they were working agile and how that needed to translate into HR processes. It was a super project.
The other point to finalize very, very quickly on co-creation, Kathy, is that one sense I'm getting on HR is that actually it's unsustainable, the amount of stuff that HR is now responsible for and taking on versus the resources we have. We can't deliver on all of the expectations and, huge expanding portfolio of processes that are now expected of us, including employee experience and culture and agility, and God knows on top of the day job. So there's something about finding different ways of working to enable the HR agenda to be sustainable. And something like co-creation is an example of that, where you're sharing the load, as it were, and not just taking all the responsibility.
I see Megan has appeared back to keep us on time here.
I think we won't get through all of the questions. Yeah, but just to say, we'll be following up with an email. We can send over the white paper that Kevin referenced. And yeah, we'll get back to all of the questions, and it's great to see so much engagement. So it must have been a very engaging talk. So thank you again, Kevin, for joining us, and always for Aisling giving such great insight. So yeah, thank you for everyone for joining us, and please keep in touch with us on social media to look for the next session on Tuesday, the 27th of October. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.